but we're going to talk about William Wright today and his family, early family, not the later Wrights. And so I guess we'll have the lights out and I'll start.
It's disappeared. Can't see it.
Now, my talk is based on the poster that is in the museum, which more or less summarizes what I'm saying today, this evening, although I will say much more than is on the poster. And the first draft of that poster was done by our student Nathan Wright in 2020. He was at high school at the time, and I finished it off this year, and we finally put it up in this expansion of our Loyalist exhibit. So if you miss parts of it, you can go to the poster and get a good summary of my talk. And you can see some of the stories that I'm going to tell tonight. Now, I have a great advantage here in that in 1978, after probably a lifetime of research, Doris Haslam, Doris Munsey as she was, published this 2-volume work. And I met Doris Haslam about 1980, in the mid-80s, when I wanted to find out something about my house in Bedeck. I thought, someone suggested, go to Doris Haslam. She will know everything about every house in Bedeck. And I wanted to know what happened to Dr. Jameson, who lived in the house. He died in 1872. And I said to him, he died very young. He was only 35 or something. And she sort of...
You've switched off, though.
Have I?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We may need to change the batteries if that's going to happen so early in the talk. Is it working again?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, no.
Let me know if it ever, whenever it turns on, and we'll prepare the battery ladies. And Doris looked a bit untrusting whether she could reveal to me that the reason that Dr. Jameson died so young, and she finally said, well, he drank, and, he died in 1872. Doris was only born in 1905, so she had been passed more or less along the stories about everyone in the community, but she was she was careful to censor, it doesn't occur in the rites of Bedeck that Dr. Jameson drank or was an alcoholic or whatever. She censored her work for that reason. This is her signature. This is the copy given to Elaine Harrison, which Elaine Harrison gave to me. And this is a picture of Doris in 1974. This is her passport photograph. And she lived from 1905 to 2000. And I'm going to mention another very important person in the deck that I had no picture of until recently. This last year I discovered a picture. George Artemis Laird wrote the book Historic Bedeck in 1948. And he was of, although he lived in Surrey, he was of Bedeck descent. His family came from Bedeck. And he had an interest in history and collected all sorts of information. And his book, I read it again just recently, and he's really quite, although he doesn't give references for everything, it's a very thorough coverage of the history of Bedeck, and he writes quite eloquently at times. And we have copies of it at the front desk for $20. It's been reprinted in the 1970s. And it covers although it's a history of the Methodist Church, which became later the United Church, he covers the whole history of the village, all the churches, all the people, the Loyalists, the Acadians, and so on. So I recommend that. And these two people, Doris said in the introduction to a book, George and I were history partners for many years, in the days before genealogy and local history were popular. Our interest in research was often considered a waste of time, and even worse, morbid. Interested in the dead, you know. I'm sure she must have got comments. What are you interested in those old people for? Okay, let me see. I think it's going to happen fairly frequently. It's, I'm going to have to go for batteries.
From the particular area, a lot of history in this area. No one at the time. I was always down Monday evenings for the presentations. Oh, yeah. Stephen, yes, I know Stephen.
Is that clear? Yep. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that, but we should have no more battery problems, I hope. Equally, well, this is historic, the deck, the reprint in 1973 of the 1948 edition. And in a copy in our library, George has, which he presented to Doris, he wrote, "To Doris, my best history partner, without whose help and encouragement this book would not have been written. George." 1948. Unfortunately, he died fairly young, in his 50s, and Bedeck lost a noted historian with his death. I want to talk just a little bit, because Doris wrote the rights of Bedeck. I want to talk a little bit about her, and we have a display on her in the museum. And very briefly, it's how is she connected to the rights? That's what I want to show. And those are her parents. Singleton Munsey, and you'll note Luetta or Etty Skierman, but you'll note that Etty died, her mother died very young, at the age of 28. She was she was an infant, 4 years old, and I think her mother died during childbirth of another child. And so that left Doris an orphan of sorts, but she then came, to explain Singleton Munsey's origin, Townsend Munsey of Carleton, he had been a soldier in the Boer War, and Harriet Mittart from Carleton area. And Luetta Skierman was the daughter, or Etty, of Jessie Skierman and Libby Colbeck. Now, Bill is recognizing the names, of course, because Libby Colbeck is your aunt. And a great-aunt, a sister of William Colbeck. So, of course, Doris Munsey is your cousin, as you know. I don't need to tell you that. A second cousin. This is Doris. This is a teacher, Alice Cairns' photo album at the school in Mount Stowe, or Central Bedeck. And Doris is the one that I've circled there. Also present, Kathleen Bagnall, Beatrice Webster, Helen Hooper, Jenny Colbeck, and Edna Green. And this teacher, Alice Cairns from Freetown, took pictures of all her students at the various schools and carefully labeled them. So Doris, what happened when her mother died, Doris came to live with her grandparents, her Skierman grandparents in Bedeck, and so was raised in Bedeck from the age of 4 or 5. Still no connection to the rights, but we need to go back another generation, and there we hit it. Her great-grandmother was Jane Wright, who died in 1881, who had married Isaac Skierman. And so that is how Doris descends from the Wrights. This is a picture of Jane Wright from her genealogy. And we have an even better picture of, well, just to explain, Jane was the daughter of John Wright, and he was one of 4 sons of Stephen, Wright, the son of William the Loyalist, who opened up the forest at what became Middleton. We'll be coming back to that later. But we have a much better picture of Jane in the museum, which has come from the estate of Doris Haslam, and also the Bible belonging to Jane, which says Jane Wright's book and before she was married. She became a Skierman when she married. So that is Doris's connection. This is her great-grandmother that she never met. But I don't know if this is a painted artist, photographic. It's painted, but whether it's from a photograph, because this lady died in 1881. Well, it's in the museum. But there's another connection. There are connections of all sorts. I don't come from Bedeck, and I don't know these connections. But I tell you, with the book, The Rights of Bedeck and the Skiermans, you can more or less work out, the Skierman book that is, you can work out most of the connections between people. And this is one that I discovered. This is actually Doris's mother, Etty Skierman, at a very young age, and with some other quite elegant young women of Bedeck, probably in the 1890s. It says Beatrice Ramsay, Prilly Skierman, Emma Wright, I think Prilly would be Etty's sister, Emma Wright, Belle Wright, and Annie Gardner. And they look quite elegant there in their style. This I found on an L.M. Montgomery website, and I'll explain in a moment. For Etty was engaged to Herman Laird. Oh. And so Doris's mother was engaged to be married to Etty Skierman. But there was another woman in the picture, Lucy Maud Montgomery, and you have only to read her journals. Now, it may be that they weren't being both courted or courting at the same time, but it's very interesting. And you can see the style of the hair, it's sort of Japanese style. It's all contemporary of that period, the two pictures. So that's a bit of background and interest that you find when you begin to go into genealogy and the connections between people. The topics I'm going to consider tonight on the Wrights: William Wright and his family in the province of New York, William Wright at Bedeck, his son Nathaniel Wright at Tryon and Bedeck, his second son Stephen Wright at Bedeck, William Wright's 4 daughters, the third generation, William Wright's grandsons. Where did they settle? Now, we're very fortunate for the Wrights, the two brothers, for Nathaniel Wright, that is, to have a memoir of Mr. Nathaniel Wright Sr. By the Reverend George Jackson in the Wesleyan Methodist magazine in 1825. The year that he died. It's a long obituary or memoir, as it's 4 or 5 pages. Unfortunately, it's a Methodist magazine, so it's largely concerned with his spiritual biography rather than his real-life biography, or at least the details of the hard work. But it contains very useful information, background information. We'll see later why he was given such a big write-up. The Wesleyan magazine was published in Halifax. And equally, when his wife died in 1839, or about that time, anyway, in 1839, there was another obituary, long memoir of his wife, Mrs. Anne Wright of Bedeck. By another Methodist minister. Both of these ministers were operating, or what do ministers do? Serving in Bedeck. So they knew. I guess they don't operate. They serve in Bedeck, and so we have those two very contemporary sources. So we're going to look at William Wright of Westchester County, New York, his family in the province of New York. We have a little bit of information contained in especially Nathaniel's memoir or obituary, and then the traditions that came down in the family that passed to Doris Haslam. Doris was writing, collecting information from a fairly young age, and as she writes in the book, she published it in 1978, but she'd been collecting data from the 1930s onward. So the grandchildren of the pioneers, the grandchildren, were still recalling what their grandparents, the grandchildren of the grandchildren. So there were people she could talk to who knew or could tell her stories of Nathaniel and William and of the next generation, their sons and daughters. Well, from that memoir, and where it says Nathaniel obit, that means that comes from the obituary of Nathaniel. The Wright family lived in Westchester County, New York, somewhere near the New York-Connecticut border. And we'll look at that in a moment. And we know, through Doris's work, at least those members of the family that came to the death. And we have 6 known children of William Wright. We don't know the name of his wife, either first or last, although there may be recent research, if anyone later will discuss that. And we've discovered just recently, like within the last 20 years, when she died in 1815, and that was recorded, as I shall mention later, in the diary of Benjamin Chappell in Charlottetown. So those are the children. There are 2 boys, Nathaniel and Stephen, and then 4 girls. And I'll come back to them later. And Westchester County, New York, is, this is New York City of the day, was just at the bottom of Manhattan Island. It was a small city, probably not much bigger than Summerside, or certainly not as big as Charlottetown at that time. And so it was at the bottom. Westchester County is written there. It goes a bit higher up. It's actually the county that incorporates New York, and it's the nearest county to New York City. So it's very, very close. And in the obituary, the writer says that the family lived 25 miles from New York City near the border of Connecticut. And when you run 25 miles on this map, that's where you end up, right at the border in that area, in either Rye or Port Chester. Now, those names had been lost or not passed down in the family, but it could only be there or in that area. And as far as I know, no one from Prince Edward Island has done genealogical work trying to trace if there are records of the family there. This is an 1867 map showing the same area, and there you've got Port Chester and Rye. And for comparison, you can see that New Rochelle, here at the bottom of the picture, is only 8 miles. That's where William Skierman came from, New Rochelle. So it's only 8 miles, a short distance away, with these 2 families that ended up in the deck. Here's a modern view of course, the city of New York has just grown and expanded, and New Rochelle, almost to the border of Connecticut, but it's that area. And when you zoom in on that, you see it's largely built up, even though but it's mostly urban area now. And then New Rochelle is there. The home, it's interesting that at least 8 families, these 7 families came from that general area, or in Connecticut beside it. The Robins came from New Jersey. So there's a cluster of people that all came from Westchester County or nearby. And Westchester County was one of the counties in New York which was in conflict. There were some counties like Kings and Queens and the eastern or western part of Long Island which were staunchly Loyalist, and others that were staunchly patriot for the rebellion. But Westchester County was an area of conflict. and that meant actual disturbance for people. And the Anglican pastor of Rye had his throat cut, and they never discovered who, because he was supporting or against the revolution. The Wright family then lived somewhere near the border. William remained loyal to the crown, that's all we know, obviously, because he was, had to come here. Perhaps because he was a Quaker and a pacifist. The Quakers tried to, as one of their beliefs, did not participate in war, and thus they were viewed as opponents of especially the Patriots, and so many people ended up as Loyalists simply because they refused to support the revolution or fight for the revolution, actually. His older son Nathaniel joined a Loyalist militia, but that's likely to be true because it's in his obituary. He had just died, the minister was, and we can assume it was honest, but it would have been a very short service because in 1783, at the end of the war, he would have only been 18. For his allegiance to the crown, William was imprisoned by the Americans for 12 months. This is again in the 1825 obituary, so this is with the grandfather of Nathaniel. The second son, this comes down in the second son, Stephen, when he made his testimony to the 1833 Committee on the Loyalists on Prince Edward Island, said that when his father was in prison, he and his mother and his sisters were left in charge of the farm, and during this time, the rebels raided the Wright farm, taking everything except one bed, which was left in the house. When the war ended, the family were dispossessed of their real estate, landed property, their farm, and their few remaining belongings, and were facing banishment from the new United States of America, like thousands of others. They ended up in the city of New York, which wasn't very far away, and we don't know when they actually reached New York, because some Loyalists got there very early because they had lost their property and were under threat from the other residents of their own area. And New York was under British military control right to the end of the war. Then to make matters worse, at some point the entire family, apart from William the father, came down with yellow fever, and that's also from the obituary of Nathaniel. New York in 1780, here is a view of New York during the period in which it was under British control. There's a Union flag flying over the fort and over the ship. And this is a view of the area that was largely controlled by the British Army, including all of Manhattan and the adjacent counties, Staten Island and such, were all under British control. So it was a place where the Loyalists flocked to for protection. And it was under the control for the entire war, under British control. It was the British headquarters of the Army in North America. And there is New York City. And here is a view, an actual British military map of 1782 made by military surveyors, showing the tip of Manhattan. And this is just, you know, it's the tip of a small city, town even. And a similar view from the 1770s. So it's not a very big place. The man in charge of the, in the final years, 1782, November 1783, was Sir Guy Carleton, British commander, later Governor General of Canada, which if you've studied Canadian history, you will be aware of. And so it was his responsibility to deal with all of these thousands of Loyalists, thousands of Loyalists, I don't know, 30,000, 40,000 people who had to be evacuated. In the fall then of 1783, probably in late September, because that comes from the obituary as well, the Wright family embarked on one of the many transport ships evacuating the city, heading for Shelburne in Nova Scotia. And Shelburne was called Port Roseway, but very quickly its name was changed to Shelburne, and there in the late summer, 8,000, almost 9,000 people were evacuated to Shelburne. Others, larger numbers, went to St. John, and smaller numbers to Halifax and Annapolis. So that by the end of late summer 1784, this place that had no people at all, well, it was a small village, had 6,329 residents. These are census figures kept, everyone was being counted. This is Shelburne today, and you can see it's in the midst of forest. There's the main highway going by, and that's a view. But one thing you'll notice is it's laid out in a regular grid. It was laid out by the British Army at that stage. It thought it would be the place of permanent residence of all these Loyalists, and it was actually much larger. It's receded because very quickly the population dropped from that 6,000 or so to really a few thousand and then a few hundred, because it wasn't a suitable place where you could farm. As you know, most of Nova Scotia is rock, except for a few isolated Annapolis Valley and so forth. So it wasn't a suitable place, and soon the Loyalists were looking for somewhere else. This is an actual view. It's a watercolor by a British military artist showing Shelburne. Now, I don't know if there's a colored version of it, but that's water in between, and there's a fort on the other side there, and these are houses that you can see. The streets still run down to the water, so all the streets. I went to Shelburne in 2016, the first time and only time I've been there, and it's a really interesting place to visit. This is the waterfront, just showing the harbor, but it is full of buildings from the 18th century, and they now preserve it as its main attraction is history and tourism. And this is part of the Museum of Shelburne. And these are some of the houses that, and there are many others. On one corner, there are 4 houses, which all were built in the 1780s, still standing in the town. Then, after 10 months at Shelburne, we're told in the obituary, they joined the group of Loyalists that William Skierman was recruiting to take up land in Bedeque Harbour on the island of St. John. Arriving in Charlottetown on the 26th of July, 1784, and at this spot, Bedeque Harbour, out somewhere in the harbour on the 5th of August. And it was this landing or arrival that we were celebrating this weekend with our Loyalist Festival. And what brought them to the island at that stage was partly William Skierman, but behind William Skierman was the governor, Captain Walter Patterson, who was trying to recruit Loyalist refugees. As it says, his council issued a proclamation inviting Loyalist refugees, provincial troops, or other American immigrants, then at Shelburne and elsewhere, to settle on the island of St. John, offering them land free of every expense, neither mountainous, rocky, nor swampy, in every respect preferable to any lands unoccupied throughout His Majesty's American dominion, meaning what remained of his American dominion after the loss of the 13 colonies. Noting that the proprietors of this island have very generously given up a considerable portion of their estates. Now, I talked about that on Saturday, so I'm not going to go into Patterson's motives, but he had land in the area and he wanted to settle settlers on it. And so William Skierman arrived at the right time. Now, so William Wright arrives in Bedeque as a Loyalist refugee, and he becomes a pioneer farmer. And you've got to think of the wrench in people's lives, that you're going from an area that had been settled. The area around Rye and Port Chester had been settled back from the 1660s, so for over a century, and had all been cleared and was well-established rural area to an area on the edge of the wilderness, basically. And so the next, for the next 35 years of his life, it would be spent in Bedeque. clearing land and establishing again. This is the muster list, which shows the list of people that came to Bedeck, and I just want to note that William Wright is listed, and his two sons are listed separately from him. Nathaniel, age 9, well, his age isn't given there, but he would have been 19, and Stephen Wright, who would have been either 16 or 17. And their names are recorded separately on the monument, which is in the park across from here. And you'll see William Wright, wife and 3 children. Those were his 3 daughters. And then you see Stephen and Nathaniel are listed separately, as they were in the muster list. Although, as we shall see, it turned out later that Stephen was later rejected for a grant because he was too young. After William arrived, he was allotted 500 acres of land. Now that was the allotment for a married man in Lot 19, and 50 acres of that was front land on the waterfront, and I'll show you it in a moment, at what is now Reeves Corner, and 450 was over 4.7 kilometers inland through heavy forest. Now, that's Lot 19, and this is the land that was available for allocation. It was the whole bottom strip of the lot which belonged to Governor Patterson, and he was freely giving this. He was turning it over to the Loyalists to attract them to his land. This is an early map which provides that information. It dates from 1784, where the Loyalist land grants. That's the line that later became the Blue Shank Road. A main road was run along that boundary, that township boundary line. So all of the town, and it was the boundary line between Lot 19 and Lot 25. Lot 25 is the north side of the Dunk. Lot 26 is south of the Dunk. And there are on the map are William Wright's 2 land allocations. We can go in and close up. 50 acres, this is Wilmot Creek, and I'll show you where that is in a moment. And he has 450 acres inland, about, as I said, 4 or so kilometers. Poor John Murray had his allocation was at the very end, 9 miles in, and so he didn't even take it up, he exchanged it. So that's 3.2 miles from that particular creek to the river. So that land wouldn't have been of much use. The clearance rate for pioneers was about 3 or 4 acres per year that you could clear. So it would take you 10 years to clear 30 acres. And here is the satellite view of the same, showing the Blue Shank Road, the Red Bridge, Route 2, and that's the land being allocated, and there is William Wright's land grant. But we can zoom in further and look at where his 100 acres was, and this is, you recognize this is the Breed's Corner, there's the Red Bridge, and his grant is right where Cool Breeze Farms runs, or is now. And you can see that this pattern, if I just take it back a bit, oops, I'm going ahead rather than... the pattern in the land is, you can see that all the still to this day, the land runs in this direction, which represents the 100-acre allocations, and over there it's running vertically. So once land is surveyed, and that was over 200 years ago, it still persists in the landscape. William did not occupy his Lot 19 parcel. He retained it, he continued to own it. Instead, he took up front land in what is now North Bedeck. And I think possibly there was some cleared Acadian land on that particular spot, which would have been much more attractive. He did end up with some of the Acadian land on that the Acadians had cleared during their short stay here from 1750 to 1758, and then they had been expelled. And 26 years later, the Loyalists arrived and would have been very attracted to any land that could be more easily cleared. His family tradition, well, and that might, you know, I don't think it's a modern invention. It's passed down in the family that everyone did live in a log house to begin with. That was standard, and it was made of logs, very quickly put up, and moss and mud and seaweed on perhaps the roof or banking it. Instead, William took up land in North Bedeck, and here is his, on this early map of 1808, we see it's actually Nathaniel Wright is written there, but William is still alive, and this is his farm. Also, Jesse Strang, William Murray, David Murray, and Samuel Ricks. And these are all Loyalists, young Loyalists. All four of the others are young men looking for wives, as we shall see shortly. And that's the road. That road is the McMurdo Road, although it's by no means that straight. It's perhaps just an attempt to show. It goes to William Skierman's mill at Wilmot, and then that's the Route 1A. That still is the road. It would be going to, it says to Alexander Campbell's, that's by the Red Bridge. He was a shipbuilder there. This is an aerial photograph from 1935 showing William's property. William Wright's farmstead. It's still occupied. There's a house on the site. I don't think it's any owned by Wrights anymore, but there's a house that was built by the Wrights, but not by William, a later house. Now, I'll explain where this is. That probably is the site of Jesse Strang's farmstead. I don't think he'd be directly on the shore. This is the Presbyterian Church in North Bedeck, the Presbyterian Cemetery. So that road, I was down it in Google. I haven't got down it in real life yet, but there are cottages along here now. And the road is, that's 1935, is still there. Despite the rough conditions at first, life began to improve for the Wrights as they gradually cleared the land. That's from Doris Haslam. And in 1786, William became the first shoemaker in the area. That's a tradition in the family. And he was even able to buy a Bible. Now we know that because of William Skierman's account book, which survives in the provincial archives, and it's a wealth of information. It was analyzed by George Laird in the 1930s, and he wrote stories of it. And here's a page with just the entries for various people, but we're interested in William Wright. And this is April 1st, 1786. It's Skierman writing his accounts. William Wright, to 1 cow, 4 pounds. So William Wright has bought a cow for 4 pounds. To 1 yard and a quarter of broadcloth, 6 and 3, or 6 shillings and 3pence. To 1 Bible, 1 pound, quite expensive. You could buy, it's a third of a cow. 1 pound, 3. So obviously his religion, he probably didn't have a Bible, or at least one that, you know, in the flight perhaps he had lost. So it's the only Bible recorded in, where William got the Bible. Perhaps it was ordered specially through Amazon or whatever, I don't know. How they ordered it in that day, 1 pound 3, and then to freight of wool to Mr. Warren's, it's 1 shilling. That's to carry wool, William Wright's wool to Mr. Warren. I think that's in Tryon. And William Skierman's going to do that, probably by ship. So that's the only account of William Wright, and he comes out very virtuously because most of the accounts, they're buying rum. And George Laird called it rum and ribbons. The women were mostly buying ribbons in Bedeck, and the men were buying rum, or but not William. His children, which you see there, soon married, and I'll later on come back to them briefly. But the 2 sons married 2 sisters, Anne Lord and Frances Lord, called Nancy and Fanny, and the three daughters married their neighbors, the three, William Murray, Jessie Strang, and Samuel Birch Ricks. So they married just young loyalists, the neighbors, and that's going to be the story, well, it's the story of life, but it was very common in Bedeck. They didn't travel far to find a marriage partner. The total number of children that they had, that you see there, each of them not less than 10. We don't know the daughter. They soon lost contact with the daughter, Mrs. Dibble, who remained in the United States. William certainly had 55 grandchildren on Prince Edward Island. Well, that was standard at the time. So after living over 30 years on his North Bedeck farm, William died in 1819 and was buried in the newly laid out Presbyterian cemetery. His mother had been a Presbyterian, his father a Quaker. That's again mentioned in the obituary. And the grave is not marked, so we don't know where he lies. His wife had died in 1814, as I mentioned. That has only been recently, Doris Haslam didn't know that date, but Benjamin Chappell writes, on the 13th of August died old Mrs. Wright of Bedeck. And that he made entries of any, and she was a Methodist, he was a Methodist, so he would have known her very well. So that's William, he's died, no gravestone, that's the story of his life, all we know about him, more or less. But it's quite a bit. Most people we don't know anything about, and we have those two obituaries and Doris Wright's research. Nathaniel, William's elder son, his time with the militia was short-lived, as he soon developed yellow fever. This is in his obituary, but it would have been very short-lived because he was only, as I said before, 18 when the war ended, so he couldn't have been spent much time in the militia. When he arrived in Shelburne, he was not expected to survive. He could hardly walk. He had to be carried off the ship. But after 10 months in that town, he had made a full recovery. When he arrived on the island in July 1784, he, as an adult person, received a grant of 300 acres, which was the single man's allocation, 150 acres of which was on front land, and 150 acres was further back. Now this is the early map in the archives, and those are his two land grants. His 150 acres, half of it is at this spot, and I'll explain where that is. He was actually very lucky in both cases. In a lot, it was a lottery that was in allocating these. It was meant to be fair. And so that is the Dunk River, the mouth of the Dunk. That's where the small bridge and the marsh is shown there. This is what's called sometimes the Bradshaw River, or I've heard it called the Little Dunk, or the south branch of the Dunk. It's the one that we pass between Central Bedeck and Centerville, or Bedeck. So it's just half a mile from here. That was his allocation. Looking at it more closely, this is there's the Bradshaw River, and it encompasses two things that are very advantageous. It has a lot of marshland attached to his property, salt marsh for cattle, and it also had a river, and which he was to develop, or his sons, into a mill pond. The inland bit is way in near the county boundary, and those are the men, and that's Nathaniel Wright. This comes from the poster on Freetown. This is South Freetown, and these people, this other part of their grant was well inland. And to show you where it is, this is from the Freetown poster, Freetown settlement poster. This is the Loyalist land grant in Lot 26, and those are other later land grants. And if we zoom in on that, this is the Drummond Road, and this is Scales Pond, and the Scales Pond Drummond Road is going this way, Scales Pond Road going up and down, and that's Scales Pond. And that's where William's 150 acres was. But that was away inland, and he never developed it himself, but he retained the ownership of it. In fact, in his first, he didn't do anything with either of his grants. He started off working for William Skierman. And we have this from Skierman's account books. These are summaries, summary, it's the full account that Doris Haslam has copied into the rights of the deck. And basically it says he's working on December 12 pence to 4 days' work, a D at the end, LSD, pounds, shillings, pence. December 17th to, so he's working so many days, right through that first winter, and he earns a total of £5, 6 shillings and twopence. But the credit in which he's getting it, you can see £2 shillings and 6 is spent on rum, which and a quart of rum, and then pork, and then to flour. That's how German spells flour, and it's not wrong. It's just at 4 pence. So he got some flour, and April 28th for 85 to 4 weeks board, and then for 2.5 yards of sheck. Anyone know what sheck is? I don't know. I've looked it up because it must be cloth if it's yards. So this is what Nathaniel is getting from Skierman. It may be Skierman's way of saying, he was Dutch, and I looked it up, but I couldn't find anything. When you Google that, you get nothing of relevance. And also to shingles. So he's being paid in 2,000 shingles and freight and banding and carrying as, I'm not sure what that means or whether it's carving or something, but he's getting 2,000 shingles for something from William Skierman. And then he suddenly leaves the deck, well, not suddenly, it's 1788. That's the next record we have of him, when he married Anne Lord, called Nancy of Tryon. He lived there in Tryon on a leased farm for 19 years. So the first 19 years of his farming period, he still has the land in the deck, are spent in Tryon on a leasehold farm. And there they had 7 children. And these are the 7 children. There are, and he's quite lucky, I suppose, for a man who has to clear wood. He has 6 boys and just 1 girl. And so a girl, Elizabeth, and 6 boys who can all be put to work when they, and all of them would have been part of the effort at clearing the forest. And then at Tryon, he had a religious awakening. Now, this is very much described in that obituary by the minister, and it's a case of the sinful person who was, he and his wife were very fond of frolics. Frolics was partying, and they had and this was a pioneer pastime. You know, they were working hard, they wanted to celebrate, and this is where the rum was going. And Nathaniel and his wife were very much part of that activity, and they had a large room in their house in which they held dances. And along in 1792 came the Methodist missionary from Nova Scotia, and I haven't written the name down, but it doesn't matter, his name, and he convinced Nathaniel and his wife that they were not leading a proper life. And so he became, he converted to becoming an ardent Methodist. Now the Methodists were very enthusiastic missionaries at that time. They've lost all that today, but they were out proselytizing. There are no Methodists in the room, are there? Well, of course, all United Church people are Methodists. But what I mean is that they were considered very evangelical, in a day. And so his neighbors were very skeptical of his conversion, because he had been partying beforehand and now gave it up completely. And so this is described in some detail in the obituary. His spiritual struggle, his abuse from the neighbors. They considered, most of them were not converted, and they did not approve. They'd lost their dance hall, I guess, as well. So in 1807 then, they moved to Bedeck to take up his Loyalist grant. We know that from the land records, that he gave up his lease. And it's a long time, you know. It had in 1807. It's 23 years since he had been given the grant, and finally he came to take it up with its mill site, and it's still called Wright's Pond, at least on maps. Does anyone have a name for the pond in Bedeck? Because I've heard some people say Laird's Pond. No one knows? Wright's Pond is the one on the official maps, so it's named after him, where he operated a corn mill, which is corn in British parlance and early parlance meant any grain. It's not sweet corn or maize. It's oats. So corn mill, also known as a grist mill, and a carding mill. So he and his sons, and in 1807, his sons, you see, are over 20, some of them the older ones there. And at Bedeck, they had four more children, 2 boys and 2 girls. So they ended up with 8 boys and 3 girls. And their house still exists. This is the house that Nathaniel built. Photographed in the 1970s by Doris Haslam, and it's in the Wrights of Bedeck. And it largely has its early cladding and corner boards, and then it got all covered up and altered and such. But it's since then it's been worked on, and that's a stage in its progress in 2010. And then later, in a later stage, this is it today. So it's taken it back to an earlier version. It isn't necessarily what Nathaniel knew, because the styling is very sort of 1830s, 40s, neoclassical, you know, columning, which was in that earlier picture as well. So they had 11 children, 8 boys and 3 girls, all looking for partners. And the 3 girls found partners in their cousins. Ethelinda married Job Wright, son of Stephen. Anne married Nathaniel Wright, a son of Stephen, so first cousins. Elizabeth married Nathaniel Eustace, who was a newcomer into the area of Loyalist extraction. But cousin marriages were common and acceptable. I don't know if they're acceptable today. I think they still are. I don't know. So, but the boys, those are the boys' marriages, all largely Loyalists from the area. Robbins, Cole was a very early family. 2 sisters married 2 brothers there. Hooper, Montgomery, an early family, not Loyalists. Sarah Hooper, Skierman, 2 Skiermans. This man married 2 Skiermans in succession as his first and second wife. So they altogether had 99 children in the next generation, and most of them have large families, which was standard at the time. Well, eventually, and I should say that Nathaniel became very important. I'm not concentrating on the religious side of his life very much, but he continued in Bedeck to be an advocate of the Methodist cause, such that he became a missionary of sorts, going to Nova Scotia, bringing missionaries back, and offering accommodation in his own house, so that it became known as the minister's house, or from 1821, it's recorded in the obituary, the minister was offered accommodation in the house. So when he died, he was referred to in the obituary as the father of Methodism in Prince County. He was the man who had sort of established or facilitated the establishment of the Methodist Church. This is his will. He died on the 25th of April, 1825. He wasn't very old. He was 60. He made his will 15 days before he died. It was described in the obituary, it was a suffering death. It wasn't an easy death for him. And as part of the obituary, not obituary, but his will, an inventory after he died was made. And inventories are always interesting. And this is the inventory. It may not be complete, but it shows all his principal property. You'll note the farm animals, 3 yoke of oxen. That clearly indicates forest clearance. Oxen are draft animals, much more useful than horses in woodland and in clearing forest, hauling logs, and so forth. So they're in the pioneer phase. 11 cows, 2 horses, 28 sheep, 12 hogs, 24 chairs. Now, what would you do with 24? We use 24 chairs in the room here, but we would never use 24 chairs in your house. So it must be, well, the kids, but I think it was for the church meetings, perhaps, or something, because the church was meeting perhaps in his house and barn, and so it may be, I don't know, but he has an 8-day clock, and you can see 8-day clocks in our museum, which would be equivalent to the ones that he had. They're tall clocks, and clocks were just coming in, that pioneers getting beyond the pioneer phase would have a clock. 1 cast stove, so he has a cast iron stove. He's heating the house. There could be a fireplace, but he definitely has a cast iron stove. That's a new thing coming in, and much more efficient, as you know, a cast iron stove. He has 4 dozen plates, I see as well here. 2 spinning wheels, that's for the women of the house, and very practical. 2 looking glasses. 1 pair of blacksmith bellows, 1 vice, and 1 anvil. So he's capable of doing blacksmithing work. And the other things are, I wonder if it's, 4 beds and bedding, and, you know, it's summary, it's a summary. But you have your basic things. There's no wardrobes, no sideboards or anything. It's all very basic, although you have your tureens and your teaspoons, 1 dozen teaspoons, and so forth. This is his will. I based selectively. I've just he basically left everything to his wife Anne, all my real and personal property for the remainder of her life or widowhood, which is sort of, I think it's perhaps a little unusual, but it's to go to his sons. He's specifying beyond when she dies, and it says to her widowhood, so if she marries, I think somewhere it says she won't continue. To my sons, and there are John, Nathaniel, William, Stephen, James, and Lewis, 250 acres bounded by Mr. Taylor's mill. That's the land inland that he had been granted, and he's obviously added to it 100 acres away in South Freetown, Mr. Taylor's mill on the Scales Pond area. And the rents from 250 acres on lot 19 divided equally between them. That's his share of his father's 250 acres on the Blue Shank Road. So they didn't get rid of the property, they kept it, and now Nathaniel, in 1825, is willing it to his sons. To my son Jesse, these are the younger sons who are still at home, age 17, I've inserted the ages there, the corn mill and 50 acres. To my son Thomas is only 13, my farm and dwelling house, barn and livestock, and the marsh bounded by Major Hooper. So the younger boys who are still at home are being given. The other boys have married and already left the house, and we'll look at their farms in a moment. To my sons, then, John, Nathaniel, William, Stephen, James, Lewis, and Jesse. It's a wonder he could remember them all on his deathbed. My marshland on the Dunk River, equally divided between them. My sons shall not sell the marsh except to each other. It's never to leave the family, the marshland. Very important for cattle. It was very valuable. to my son Stephen, the land on the east side of the mill stream, on the condition that he purchases or rents an equal quantity of woodland on Tryon Road for my son Thomas, the youngest son. This is telling us something about woodland in the area. There is wood on this property that he's passing to Stephen, which is no longer going to be in the home farm lot. And so Stephen has to buy a wood lot for Thomas on the Tryon Road. Stephen is to allow a road to the property of my son Jesse. Now, to Stephen, the carding mill, I leave the. Did I leave Jesse out? Jesse gets the. One boy gets the. No, I guess it's below. To Stephen, the carding mill, I leave the mill stream and the mill dam containing the corn mill and the carding mill to my sons Stephen and Jesse. To my and the 8-day clock is the only item of. He wants it to go to Stephen. Perhaps Stephen had a special affection. I don't know, or you never know. You can speculate all sorts. So the clock will include. It's the only piece of furniture included in the will. Signed 15th of April, and he died 10 years later. 10 days later. I just want to show you where this is the lake map where these boys are living. These are the spots, and I'll clarify this later with a more modern map. This is the 1863 lake map, and there's Central Bedeck, Centerville, which is the until recently the name for Bedeck, and there's Wright's Pond, and there's the home farm at the top there. And you can recognize this is the Cyriltown Road. And so I'll go by age. John has established on the Cyriltown Road, which had been run through earlier. This is in wilderness forest. You've got all these boys are clearing land from forest. William has near the shore at what's called South Shore at the time, and that. The house still exists, as I shall show you later, and you can see William Wright written there. Nathaniel is on the main road up the hill towards Cyriltown there until you get to the top of the hill. And then Stephen is at the mill. You remember Stephen's getting the mill, and Jesse, well, James is just above Stephen on the same road. So 4 of the boys and Lewis, 4 of the boys are clearing land in this direction, and William as well. And Jesse then, the second youngest at the mill, and at home, on the home farm, age 13, Thomas. So those are the properties. Let's look at it as it was in 1935. This is Centerville and Central Bedeck. And these are the 3 properties as viewed from the air. They're still evident in 1935. Nathaniel Wright Sr., so this is where the father is living and which he is willed to Thomas. And then Jesse and Stephen, those are their farmsteads in 1935. We'll zoom in on that a bit closer. That's Nathaniel's property, which still exists. The barns are gone, but you can see the barns in 1935 from the air. And Jesse is at the mill site. This road still exists. Last year we traveled that road. You remember when the bridge was out, and I didn't even know you could go that way. So that was where Jesse's house was, and Stephen's was up in this direction. Both are gone now. And looking at them even closer, there's Wright's Pond, and there's Jesse's house and Stephen's house. And this is a picture of I remember the Jesse Wright house. This was drawn by the Reverend Tuck in the Island Magazine in 1978. And I saw it as it was obviously a very old house, and I thought it looked very interesting. And then I came back one summer, and it had been burned to the ground as I presume it was destroyed as a derelict building. but it persisted up into perhaps the 1980s or 90s, I'm not sure when. This is Jesse himself in old age and his wife Sarah Hooper from the rights of the deck. And you have to envisage these people being much younger as pioneers. This is in they've become part of the establishment, and they've labored throughout life. This is Stephen's house, Elmdale, Stephen Wright homestead, also by the mill, shown in the rights of the deck. And this one is within living memory, isn't it? No one acknowledging that they remember this house? I don't remember it because it's gone, but the site is still there. It is now gone. This is Stephen in his old age and his second wife, Millicent Palmer. And then the other two who are nearby are Nathaniel Jr. His house he called Fairview. Now this is the road to Fernwood, and then the split. You go to Fernwood here and Shelton here. So there's nothing there now. But there was a house there and a farm called Fairview. This is James' property, a little bit further up on the hill, and that's where Valerie and Barry live, so I don't know if you have any memory of an old house in that spot. This is Fairview, Nathaniel Wright homestead, and you can see they've long left the log house behind. This is in probably mid-1850s onward. They're building, they've gone beyond the pioneer phase, and they're building houses that are quite substantial and very habitable, with lots of rooms. The other two, John and Lewis, were further out along the Sealtown Road. I know Lewis is where Gordon Sobey has his farm property now, so there's nothing remaining of the house, and I'm not sure if anything remains of John's house. And this is William, the one that was in South Shore or Shelton, and his wife Isabella Cole. And this is a picture. Their house still exists. That house, what was the family that lived in it? McCardle, yes. McCardle house. I've been through that house when it was for sale a few years ago, and it had a lot of the old features, but it's been greatly altered. And then there are, this is a picture of John Wright. We have a picture of him and his wife, second wife. He's the oldest son of Nathaniel, but we have no picture of their property. And this is Lewis and his wife, second wife, Mary, and in their old age. So that's Nathaniel, but as I mentioned, there is a great deal of, part of his legacy was not just children and houses. Part of the legacy of Nathaniel was his spiritual or religious legacy, I suppose, and that of his wife, and both are recorded there. And she was also called the founder of, the mother of Methodism in Prince County. And this is the legacy that they have left, because this is right next to their property, the farm property, and it's the successor of earlier churches, which weren't on this site, somewhere in Lower Bedeck, the initial church was. But this is the same institution that he contributed to. Let's go to, his eulogist described him as a man of great simplicity and sincerity, of evenness of temper and conduct, and of unfeigned humility. He died in 1825 and was buried in the Methodist graveyard in Lower Bedeck. And this is his gravestone. This is what it says, very simply, in memory of Nathaniel Wright, his death date, and also his wife Anne, who died, as you see, 13 years later, age 70. There's an error. This is Doris Haslam. It says that this is should be 1839, but people often make mistakes. You can't go by, 20 years later when you're putting up the stone, what year did Dad die? Stephen Wright of North Bedeck. So we're now going to go to look at Stephen. Because William's younger son Stephen was only about 16 when he arrived on the island, his application for a land grant was turned down. Instead, he was given tools and supplies to help his father. He married Frances Fanny Lord, the sister of Nancy, his brother Nathaniel's wife, and they lived with his father and mother in North Bedeck, in the property that I showed you before. And we have in the museum, we were given it by Jean Cameron MacDonald about 8 years ago, the original marriage license of Stephen Wright, farmer of Bedeck, and Fanny Lord, spinster of Tryon, 11th of July, 1791, issued by, or signed by Robert Gray, Attorney General, and issued by Governor Fanning. So it's a very valuable family loom which has been deposited in the museum. They had 10 children, 5 sons and 5 daughters, and on his father's death, he inherited the North Bedeck farm, which I showed you earlier. These are his 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls. And this is their house. A picture taken in 1894. These are his descendants. This is the whole farm property. Barns over here. The horses are brought out for the picture, always standard. Hold the horse, and the farm horses are brought out, and they're all posing. And if we look more closely at his house, you can see it's more or less identical to Nathaniel's house. It has the same porch with windows either side, and we can't see the edge of the corner board, but it's the same standard 1.5 story central front door, 2 windows, a window on either side. We have something that another piece related to Stephen in the museum, donated by a descendant, and it's a letter, a business letter written to Stephen Wright by James Anderson of Halifax, a businessman in Halifax, in 1797, acknowledging the receipt of 18 fox skins in good order and remitting goods in payment. So Stephen had a little sideline on, trapping animals, foxes, and sending them off to Halifax. They were could be very valuable, especially if they were silver or black foxes. Stephen's children, we'll look at the marriages of them. The girls married a Pearson from the South Shore, and the Pearsons were there quite early and are still there. A Skierman and a cousin, this is a cousin, first cousin once removed, it's a later generation. And William Anderson is not the Andersons of Bedeck, but of New Brunswick. And Frances married William Skierman. So just marrying people who are locally. And then the sons marrying Skiermans, bakers. That was an early, they lived in this very land where we are on, the first baker as a Loyalist. Wrights, also cousins. So their cousin marriages again. And altogether, Stephen had 55 grandchildren. Briefly, I'm getting near the end. Stephen was employed, a significant, he was a farmer in North Bedeck and a fox trapper as well, obviously. He was employed to manage the estate of an absentee proprietor of the northern half of Lot 27. His name was Horatio Mann, and he's left a diary. He's a very interesting person in his own right. And his wife was Isabella Cyril, whose father had been granted the land in 1767, and Cyriltown comes from. We're talking the area of Cyriltown and Kincora where the lands were. And as a result, Stephen acquired, I don't know if he purchased it or whether it was his fee for managing the estate for a short time, 800 acres of land in what was called Southwest, or Southwest. And I wondered, why are they calling that Southwest? Southwest Bedeck, sometimes they called it, Southwest Bedeck. It has nothing, because it's east. It's not, you know, southwest, it's southeast. But it's the river there, which is called the Southwest branch of the Dunk. And so the community was called Southwest, and it's now called Middleton. And he gifted this land to 4 of his sons. And we'll go back to that lake map. And these are the 4 sons in Middleton. So the Stephen's sons are all settling in Middleton, except one is on the home property in North Bedeck. And his sons, John, the oldest, William, Stephen, and Job. And here we have only photographs of only the eldest, John Wright, and his wife Jane Skierman, and we don't have photographs of the other 3 sons there, and Nathaniel, who was the other 4 sons. And we only have one photograph of one of their homesteads, and this is Job Wright's homestead in Middleton in 1894. It's the same year as the Nathaniel Wright property, or the Jesse Wright in Northern Bedeck, North Bedeck. Jesse Wright was living there at the time. Had the photograph taken, so someone was going around taking farm pictures, probably, and they were all getting their horses out to have these pictures taken. This is the 1880 Meacham Atlas, and it shows the properties. Now, this is 1880, not 1820s, and so John Wright, and I'll explain where these are in a moment. There's Middleton. You're coming along from Bedeck, and then you head to Charlottetown this way if you're taking Route 1A, or you go Route 225 through Kincora, and there's the road from Thirltown. So that's John Wright. At the mill site, by the way, you'll notice there, another mill site. William. William has died, but his 3 sons, and they've expanded their land. It's no longer 200 acres. There is Stephen, still alive, and to be recorded as the owner, along with his son Alpheus Wright, both put as owners, and Job is still alive. And so those are the properties. They're not contiguous. They're 2 beside each other and 2 beside each other here, and then there's a gap in between. And they are called the Middleton Wrights. They become a sort of branch of the family. This is the aerial photo 1935. So this is a Middleton corner, or this is the same road. This is the road from Bedeck to Kincora there, and there is the road cutting across to Albany. And there's John at the river site. Well, I'll get close on that later. William, I'm questioning. It seems to be from the Meacham's Atlas. That would be his house. Stephen definitely, and I think possibly the house still survives. There's a very old house in there, sort of derelict. And Job would be about there. So those are the 4 Wright farms in Middleton. And this shows the southwest branch of the Dunk. This is the mill pond here, and this is John's property. Now this house, the road, as you can see, no longer bends that way. It's been straightened, but there is the Wright Mill Road labeled there, and the road and the farm property is there. And I know Joan Wright is here tonight and may recognize all this. So Stephen he lived to 1841, was described as resilient and a hard worker, but he died suddenly, probably a stroke, in 1841, aged about 73, when he was about to continue threshing his wheat and oats with a flail. I should have brought down the flail from upstairs in my museum. He had just remarked about his good health and his intention to thresh the whole harvest himself over the winter. So that was taken as an oath, he was being hubris. I'm going to harvest, and suddenly he drops dead. It was commented on, but I've left that out. Except I've said So he did not leave a will. He wasn't expecting to die so soon. And as a result, his family had to administer the estate. And this is the inventory. And it's sort of far more, and it's, that's not my misspelling. I just spelled it as it is. I went to Charlottetown and got the inventory. You can get it, the original on microfilm. And so you'll notice what he has. He has 2 pair of oxen as well. More horses. This is 15 years later. It could be indicating the pioneer phase is ending. 2 horses, 2 mares, 1 horse colt, 2 pair of oxen, steers, heifers, cows, calf, bulls, sheep, 8 pigs. They leave out the chickens. They surely had chickens and ducks, but they're not in either inventory. 3 stacks of wheat, 3 stacks of oat, and then the paper is pinched when they photographed it. You'd have to go to the original to see what is referred to there. Harness, 2 pair of horse traces, 2 ox chains, 1 set of blacksmith's tools, various 3 planes, 1 adze, 1 axe, 2 hand saws, 1 crosscut saw, 1 set of fire irons, 5 iron pots, 1 tea. This is really an open fireplace here. 1 bake oven, 1 frying oven, and a stove. He has a cast iron stove as well. So they could have both. 2 flat-bottom boats, which is interesting. 1 clock, so he's got a clock too. You can see all sorts of other things. 140 acres, 7 acres of land, part of Laughter Township 25. That's the North Bedeck farm, which he has left to no one, so his sons have to administer the estate. It was his property. Oh yes, most of his sons had already been given property. Nathaniel, the youngest son, remained on the home farm, and the other 4 were in Middleton. He was buried near his brother in the Methodist cemetery, where his wife Fanny would later join him. But poor Fanny, I think the stone's been broken, lost its lower half, split, and then they've reset in the upper part, and I don't know where the lower part is, but it's a short stone, you can tell when you look at it compared with the others. Just briefly on his daughters, William Wright's oldest child was a girl, as we said. She stayed in Westchester County, or moved into Connecticut. And the 1790 U.S. Census records a Solomon Dibble and a family of 6 living in the county in Connecticut next door. All the other 3 daughters, as we saw before, married came to the island, and all married young Loyalists. Hannah married William Murray, and they had 10 children. Sarah married Jessie Strang, and they had 12. Lydia married Samuel Birch Ricks, and they had also 12. And all 3 daughters have left many descendants on the island and elsewhere. And this map shows where they were living, as I've shown you this before, but there's William Murray, married Hannah Wright. Jessie Strang married Sarah Wright, excuse me. And Samuel Ricks married Lydia Wright. And on the home farm, then Nathaniel, or Stephen, was living, and then passed to his grandson. And I end with this photograph. It's from Ontario or Upper Canada, but just to give, this is the situation that these people were having to face, creating a log house and the task of clearing the forest. And they managed to do it within a very quick time, within 2 generations, and certainly in the lifetime of all those 8 and 5, 13 boys and their sisters and their husbands. By the end of the century, the 1860s and 70s, they were living, they'd gone through this pioneer phase. So thank you very much for coming, and if you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. I'm sorry, well, it's only 8:30.